Well, look at that. It looks like a homely little workshop. Bum bum bum. It's the PRS SE. SE, and it's got 24 frets. So, here's Ryan's SE PRS. And it's a rare one, well, one of 750 made, this special finish. Great looking, looks like it's sandblasted swamp ash, but it's been sort of sandblasted so that the grain kind of digs in, and then they've put paint in there. Not quite sure how they've, not quite sure how, they've obviously finished this black, then they've put paint in and probably blown it out or something, and then sprayed straight over the top, so the paint, because you can't really sand over the top, leave the painting, because you end up endlessly taking away. Anyway, who cares? It's a nice finish though, look at that. Just a note on sound. I had somebody make a comment the other day about how they couldn't hear me, and although I looked at my, in Final Cut Pro, I looked at the sound waves, and they were kind of very high, lots of bass energy in them and so on and so forth. But what I've realized is that I just don't have one of those voices that cuts through. I've got lots of bass tones in my voice, I suppose, and not a lot of middle, which means there's energy in it as far as the signal is concerned, but I have to do some treatment to it if I'm going to make it cut through. And I sort of reluctant to do that because it's, you know, just because everybody else has a kind of penetrating, sharp, screechy voice on YouTube, doesn't mean I have to as well. So I may look at a very simple kind of once over treatment that's easy to do, but I'm not getting into massive editing situations. So what have we got here? We've got an interesting thing, because this is one of the few PRSs that's come through the workshop, and that in itself is a good sign. So why is that? Well, because PRSs tend to be very good guitars. Now they are kind of chalk and cheesy, no, what's the word, marmitey or something. You know, people either love them or some people don't like them. Some people find them anonymous and bland, lifeless. Some people find them the best guitars ever made. And they've got a lot going for them in terms of a nice design, great string through, straight line strings going through the nut there. But this is interesting because Ryan has just never, or the story of this is that he bought it new, kind of had what he called the honeymoon period with it for a few months, and then took it to a tech because he felt it could be better, which is fairly common, but it's difficult to know because it's a bit non-specific. So somehow it felt it could be better. And then since then, he's taken it to about 3 techs along, one after another over time, and it just has never been right. And so that's the kind of about as detailed as his description of it goes. Now, first of all, I'm not criticizing that. It's very difficult to explain what it is we don't like about a guitar sometimes, but there are times when we just don't, and that's how it goes, and there's very little we can do. Because it's the way we relate to a guitar tends to be a combination of physical, you know, the touch, the way it plays, and even that itself is a whole complex of different qualities. On top of that, there's the psychological aspect, which can be absolutely overwhelming in terms of whether we get on with the guitar or we don't. And so all it takes is 1 or 2 things to not be quite right on a guitar, and it becomes impossible to live with it. And it's actually quite a difficult thing then to get anyone to put right, because you get into this cycle of taking it to a luthier, and if they're not careful, the luthier rubs his hands in glee thinking, aha, I'll fix this, the other useless luthier couldn't, you know, and then there's this sort of ego thing that goes on. So the luthier's ego is tied up in it, and then the owner's psychology is tied up, that they almost, no matter what anyone does to it, they don't like it anymore because it's just had so many bad feelings attached to it. So it can be a bit of a hiding to nothing. And I had to just talk a bit about that with Ryan when he dropped this off, saying, you know, just be conscious of how much all of that sort of psychology of not liking it can lead to just a sort of inability to ever like it, no matter what is done to it that makes it better. So with that in mind, what I said I would do is I would do what I did with his previous guitar, which is I will make it play low and light, and I will make it stay in tune, and I will make sure the neck has some relief, because currently it's flat to the point of possibly backbowed. The action was high. I've lowered it down a bit. I think the bridge is probably just about set right at the right height, but I'll double check that. There's an optimum position, but I think we've got enough adjustment anyway. And I'm going to give it a clean up, and there's lots of annoying little things like the strap buttons are loose, the jack socket is loose, it's grubby, the nut is wrong. We've got a replacement nut here, which I'll get to the exact right height. And just take care of all of that stuff. And if it needs any fret leveling, which I'm not entirely sure it will, but I'll do that as well. So I want to give this back in the best possible situation. I mean, a couple of little things I know I can improve straight away. So I'm hoping that the combination of small things adds up to a feeling that Ryan can enjoy this guitar, which he's actually never really bonded with. So that's, for me, that's a really fun challenge. I like that. But I do have to point out that, that psychology of having come to hate something can be incredibly powerful. I've even got some new screws here to replace these old tired looking things, so I can give everything a good clean. So with that in mind, where do we actually start? Well, I've got a feeling that I'm not going to get all of this done tonight, because I've started late, because foolishly I didn't charge my batteries and ended up having to, well, I thought I charged them, but I hadn't switched the switches on at the mains. So meanwhile, I've been doing some things. I've been cutting out some timber for a rifle stock for a child's toy gun. I know it's not a great thing, toy guns in this day and age. Right, but it's I made toy guns for my kids years ago because they insisted on having them, and they still got them, and their much younger half-brother plays with the toy guns that I made for them, and little fella actually rang me up, or texted me the other day and said, would you be possible to, I love your guns that you made for my brothers, is there any chance that you could? I thought, you creeping little devil, of course I'll do it. I couldn't resist. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to adjust the truss rod, because there's no relief in this neck at all. Now, as it happens, I've got 9s on here that I put on. The original strings were so filthy that I took them off, because I just wanted to, off camera, get a sense whether I could live with this guitar. So I wanted to just play it for a bit. Now, Ryan didn't know what the strings were on there, so I guessed at 9s, and judging by the way they've left the bridge slightly tilted back, I think they were probably 10s. So I'll replace with 10s, but for the time being I'm going to put a bit of relief into here. Now this is a different adapter attachment. Truss rod adjuster is the word I'm looking for. It's not it's a sort of Gibson-esque style one, but it's a PRS one, which, funnily enough, because I don't see these little critters, I don't have one that's custom built for that, so I'll use an appropriate socket, which I have here. So I'm just going to slack this off a little bit and see if we can give it a chance to have some curvature in there. It may have to go the other way into a positive turn. It's got a tiny bit now. I'll keep turning it. Yes, so I've had a funny couple of days regarding I ordered some new what are they called, hacksaw? No, bandsaw blades, because mine, there we go, a little bit of relief, good. Yeah, mine had gone blunt, and I ordered a couple and they arrived, and I tried one on, and put it on. Well, I took it out of the pack, it unsprung itself. Yeah, put it on, and it jumped off. It rattled and jumped off, and after a couple of tries, it didn't even occur to me. I noticed that the blades were pointing upwards instead of down, the teeth, which of course was no use at all. So I thought, hang on a minute, this ain't going to be no good. So I figured, I looked at it and I thought, how the hell am I going to get round this? And I was stumped, because now here's the thing, you probably know already, and you might not, because a lot of people I've shared this story with actually don't know secret I'm about to say. So they're as kind of in the dark as I was, and some of them have even said to me, well, thank you for coming out and saying you didn't know that, because nor did I, and now I do, and I won't be won't catch myself making a fool of myself. Well, it turns out, ladies and gentlemen, that if your blade, your blade has the teeth upside down, it means that your bandsaw blade, your blade has springed inside out, and to put it right, you have to flip it inside out. Right now, I didn't know this because I've never done it. Why have I never done it? Because the blades I've bought in the past have never been inside out. Anyway, so I initiated yesterday, before I realised this, or before I figured this out, or before it was revealed to me, thankfully, I contacted the seller and initiated a return. And anyway, when I sort of discovered this thing, I sheepishly kind of got back in touch, and they said, look, we understand, the lady said, you're not the first and you certainly won't be the last. To which my brain said, well, why don't you put a bloody thing on the listing saying, P.S. if your teeth appear to be the wrong way up, you need to spring the... And it's a physical thing. If you've never done it, you've never done it. So anyway, she said, but don't worry, I'll... Because the one I put on snapped as I was trying to coil it up to send it back. And she said, that's fine, I'll send you a new one anyway. So I was pleased with that. So I'm waiting for my new one. And I went to get the next one out because I bought two at once. This one was, the teeth were the right way round. But as I unsproinged it, it came out bent like that around where the weld is. Okay, so it was, and as soon as I unsproinged it, it just went like that. So now I've got two dead ones and one good one being sent back. So I'm going to have to go back and start the thing again. I mean, it's not cheap, it's 20 quid, but more annoyingly, I was cutting up these pieces just now for this toy gun, and it took me forever because my blade is blunt. Okay, so I'm kind of happy with that. Now what I don't know on these, and I think I did try out, but what did it say in my notes? I said very good frets. Pretty good. Now it's funny because one of the things Ryan talked about, okay, we are choking out there. So what's this? This B, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18th fret bend, choke out. Okay, so that's good. It's not so low that it shouldn't play at that height, so I'm going to go and sneeze. That's because of all the sawdust, forgive me. I'm lining up. I've had to clear up as well tonight because I'm lining up to do some clear spraying tomorrow, so I wanted my spray space to be dust free. So I did a load of bandsawing. Right, so this they're in good shape, but there is a choke out there which we will need to do, and it was on the 18th, wasn't it? So high E on the 18th bends. So let's get rid of that. PRS should play at that sort of action. So the thing I'll do is I'm going to change the nut, but I'm not going to change it just yet. I'll do the leveling with the nut as is. Then we'll get rid of the nut, put the new one on, tailor it. We'll take the bridge apart, clean it, give everything a clean. We'll do the fret leveling first. Then we'll remove the strings, sort the nut out. Now let me get this right. After fret leveling, I'll keep these strings on. Remind me to do the nut before I take the sacrificial strings off, just because it's easier. This nut is going all over the place, so but it's too low and it's not fitted properly, and so I'm going to give it a new one which should make it stay in tune beautifully. Because this thing has a nice tremolo system on it, it has a push-in arm with a little locking screw, which was first thing that was nice that I was able to point that out to Ryan, because I don't think he knew that it had that thing, so he didn't like the slop of the arm. So the great thing is he's now going to have to kind of be able to play it without that getting in the way. So that's a straight away a bit of a win. Yeah, so we want to make this thing stay in tune when used with the decent tremolo, even though it's not particularly, I don't think it's particularly part of his playing style, but you know, you've got this floating tremolo kind of built in with these PRSs, so we might as well make it work. So starting off, I was hoping, well, originally I was thinking we might get away without doing fret leveling, but you know, that is definitely choking out at that position. Now the nut is really terrible. Okay, so there's our guitar in playing configuration. So before I start doing the leveling, I want to make sure the relief is where I want it. Yep. I want to make sure the action is where I want it, which I've just done. And normally I would make sure the first fret action was exactly where I wanted it, but in this case it's okay because I'm going to change that myself afterwards. So I think tonight I will get get straight into the leveling part and just see how far we go. I don't want to be out too late tonight in the old workshop. My wife has just been into hospital for a long-awaited operation. She won't mind me telling you at all. She's had breast cancer twice is the word in English language. She's had it twice over 20 years. So first time nearly 20 years ago, and second time a couple of years ago. And where's the, oh no, there it is. Yeah, so she's the first time she had what they call a lumpectomy, which is a kind of a local incision to take out the cancerous area, and after that she had radiotherapy and chemotherapy, which are pretty hideous. I mean, the surgery the first time wasn't so bad, but you know, the chemotherapy and radiotherapy, she's never been very well generally, and the chemotherapy particularly, you know, 3/4 killed her, which is meant to do, because it's kind of how it works, but it's a hideous experience. So she kind of went through that, and one of the horrible things for women when they're reasonably young and they go through that, the chemotherapy tends to bring on early menopause, so she went through that as well. Let me just show you something. So just a quick look. Cutting, lots, not much more, not much at all, a little bit more, not anything there, a little bit, not much, none. So a few ups and downs there, which is interesting. What I'm kind of expecting to see at this point in time is that 18 should be low, and lo and behold, let's see, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, must be 17 was low. Maybe I've counted it wrong. Anyway, so I'm just going to give this a tiny little bit more. Anyway, so yeah, so she had all of that complete life-changing stuff all in one go. Anyway, so she kind of, as anybody who's probably had cancer will confirm, is that you sort of, you recover, you know, if you're lucky, you recover and you've got, you get to survive more years, but it totally changes your quality of life and so on. So Claire had a completely different and reduced experience really after that, but you know, she made the most of it and we did together. Anyway, so, you know, about 16 years after the first time, she got it again, and this one's been, this is low here, that's been hammered sometime in the past. There's a few frets here that are very low right here, 12, 13, 14, that's interesting. Yeah, so she got it again, and had to, this time it was a case of needing to go with a mastectomy, you know, on one side. So she had that, and then straight away the surgeon, you know, they kind of ask if you want a breast reconstruction, and you know, it's important for a lot of women. So she went for that, and they put an implant in straight after the surgery to remove the cancer, and then got kind of straight into the course of chemotherapy again, this time while trying to recover from the surgery and with this implant fitted, and her body just wasn't up to it, and the wound, you know, the surgery wounds just wouldn't heal. So eventually, before long, it was obvious that I needed to take that implant out, which they did, and then it took her about a year for the wound to properly heal, but thankfully it did eventually. Twelve, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Yep, that's freed that up, which is good. I'm going to do a little bit more on the G. Anyway, so yeah, about a year after all of that surgery and treatment, she finally, the wound finally healed up. And, you know, sort of now her life, kind of general stamina and health is kind of down to a quarter of what it used to be because of the second bout of chemotherapy. So it's been a really hard time, you know, struggling to really get much done in life, you know, and it really limits what she can do, outdoor activities, sort of social life. Yeah, and it's just more about energy and complete exhaustion than anything else. Anyway, so kind of where it went after that was, because the first implant thing didn't work out straight after the surgery, it was obvious that she was going to have to wait until the surgery wounds finally healed up before she could be kind of put on a list to have a different kind of reconstructive surgery, which uses the body's own fat reserve, shall we say, and and moves a bit of skin around here and there and does some very clever things actually. So I can't remember how long ago they put her on the waiting list for that, but just a couple of weeks ago, it just suddenly, almost out of the blue, it came up with, right, you know, such and such, 10th, 8th of October or whenever it was. So she jumped at it and went in last week, and it was amazing actually. The operation, she came out of it very, very, very differently. I don't know, it's not a very good way of putting it, but she immediately looked, straight after, it was a long operation, but the surgeon said, although it's a long operation, it's not terribly invasive because it's inverted commas surface. It's not sort of deep inside your organs and heart and livers and whatnots. I'm having trouble getting this to line up. As you can tell, I'm backwards and forwardsing. Anyway, so there we go. So yeah, she straight afterwards, when I went to see her, she was looking much brighter than I would have imagined after a long operation. And 2 days after that, they let her home, and she's home now, taking it easy, sleeping quite a bit, because you never really get to sleep in hospital terribly well. So yeah, so that's hopefully that's the last time she'll be going into the bleeding hospital for that sort of thing. But yeah, it's an amazing technology that they do, and I haven't seen the results exactly, but it's just far better and far more natural than using implants and things like that. It's just moving things around and putting some unwanted fat stores from somewhere else to a place where they could do some good, which is amazing. So I'm very happy that she's so well at the moment after that. And I think, you know, the thing that us blokes never have any idea about whatsoever, of course, is just how much being lopsided it means. You know, she's done great. You know, she's been out and been social and situations and stuff. You know, but it's never felt completely comfortable. Clothes don't fit because you're not really got much to hang them off, sort of thing. So this hopefully will, you know, just make a bit easier for her. She deserves it, I think. Yeah, so that's been the kind of, that's been on the cards this last couple of weeks, really, running up to that. And then before that, most of my kind of attention was taken up by getting ready to play at my friend's wedding, which, because of the importance of it, actually became a very stressful thing. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I don't regret it, but I think for all of us it took more energy and okay, I'm going to do a tiny bit more on the G track, just between the two tracks. Yeah, I think it took quite a bit of energy and nervous strain or something, you know, because it becomes, it's not even like a gig in your local pub where, you know, it's okay, you can be crap and get booed off and nothing really matters. But when you're playing at somebody's big day and, you know, there's a lot of emotional stuff tied up in it, then it becomes a different thing, I think. Anyway, so we did it and it went well, considering. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, while we're here, I'll just try and zoom in a bit more because this is probably the lousiest view in the world. I'm going to slack off, and before we do any crowning or anything, I'm going to use these old strings to get rid of this nut. Oh no, I was just thinking, of course I shimmed it to make it play. It was too low before, so I put in a little piece of tin foil under there just to get it playing. It wasn't glued in, so it came off easily. But I lifted it up just enough to play, but the strings were on the floor. There you go, that's from my a little bit of tin foil from my scalpel blades. So that's history. Let's get this new one. This new one purchased for size. What I don't like is there's a bit of a tag sticking off here, and then there's a bit of a bump on that end too. So let's clean up the end so we make sure everything's as good as it can be. Now I've got a bunch of blades here that I think I'm going to retire, send to the blade amnesty land, because they just get in the way after a while. Keep one, keep the new ones. Yeah. So yes, it's I'm kind of back on track a bit now. I've got a fair bit to get on with and take care of. Now I can think straight. Got a Taylor baby coming in for a setup. Hopefully I will get another set of shims from our friends at Taylor in the Netherlands. That will be my plan, because I'm going to sort of resolve to, now I know that they're willing to help people like me with supplying the correct shims, I'm committed to doing it the right way. Now I can. Okay, just getting rid of some of the glue there and finding out what's up with this. This looks odd. I think we've got a flat spot there. We've got a ditch in there, so it's not even. That's a bit of a bummer. I mean, it's not going to be the end of the world. This will fit much better. But just to be conscious that that's been, the original nut, I think, has been taken out, and as a result, it's taken a big chunk of the base with it. Now I'm just getting rid of some of this glue here, which doesn't look so hot either. Yeah, I could get this all right and then squeeze in some resin, dark resin or something in, but I don't really want to fix this in so permanently. So given the fact that it's not going to hurt it sitting on that gap, then I think I will prefer to. That's interesting, that is thinner. I measured that and now it's actually thinner. It doesn't matter, it's close enough, but that's really weird. This is the only one that I could get that would fit. And this fella is total of 547. This is supposed to be 6. It's 5. 1.7, 1.196. 0.196, 0.196 millimeters, no, inches. 0.196 in millimeters. Go away. 0.196. That's gone 9. 0.196 inches to millimeter, which is 5 mils. That's not what it said in the listing that I looked at. Oh well. I mean, I could beef it out with a bit of this, make it, fit a little bit of extra at the back, but actually it doesn't. It's not that important. This has been replaced and moved around a few times already. So the first thing I care about is whether this surface is even flat, which I have to say right now I'm not at all convinced that it is, which is a pain, because it's got to be flat before we go anywhere. Now these strings are sacrificial ones, so they can be pulled off and or dragged out of the way for the time being, so we can just do adjustments. Just stay there, please. Kind of difficult. There is a string spreader tool, but I never bought one because it just seemed a bit nuts, really, to have pay for a thing to move the strings when you can do it with a bit of tape. Right. So when you're not sure that whether you've got a flat surface or not, you can check with a flat blade or something like that. And this very quickly, I get rid of some of the sticky up stuff. This tells me quite quickly that I do not have a flat surface at all. It's you won't be able to see it from here, but there's a significant dent under there, and as mentioned, I can only really take care of that by filling it with some filler resin. Now, you know, if it was really bad, if it is really bad, I could repair that with some resin straight away. It'd have to be quick drying resin, because all I care about is that the nut sits on here properly, and right now it's got a bit of too much wobble for my liking, and that's probably because this surface here is still uneven. Now, of course, if I put some resin on here, it's going to require all this cutting again to level it, although you can maybe help flatten it out by putting the nut on there, as long as you're careful that it doesn't get stuck. So some sort of cellophane or something would be good, or tin foil, just to make it removable. So this is not very good. I don't know what's been this. It's hard to tell whether this has been broken away here. It tends to be the case that when a nut gets pulled off, it takes a chunk of whatever. In this case, I think it's a bit of this finish on the headstock down to the wood in that place. Often you'll find that the thing is, the slot is wood, period. But in this case, it's I think it started with the black finish, which has been lifted up with the nut. Now the problem is, I think I'm going to be here for a long time if I try and wear that down using the nut slot file. So I think I'm going to have to just help it along a bit with this chisel, because we're just going to have too big a fall away or a gap. I'll see if I can get a little bit closer. We don't know if we can. I have to go to the other side as well. Again, blade edge is really good for seeing what's what. Now, if we have to go the other side, we have to change it all round, so forgive me, you won't get a good view of this just now. When I go up this end, I suppose I can take you. You're freewheeling at the far end. Now this way I can do the same up here, and just very carefully work away at the end so that we get a little bit further down. I have a feeling that I don't want to go all the well. To level it out, I would probably have to go all the way down to the timber of the neck, but it's not really ideal. So I'm going to just try and get it as squared away as I can, so that the nut has a chance of sitting on there firmly. Firmly? You firmly, Whittingstall. So that Let's have a look. Sorry, you can't see this. I'm just going to go down the edge here, make sure that there's nothing stuck to the front face of that for starters. And try it again. Just check the bottom of this to make sure it is also smooth. So we've got a bit of rocking going on. You can't see this, but if I hold this up here, what am I looking at? Right, so that tilts away. Okay, so that's a little bit of a problem. This is uneven in this direction, so I'm going to try and just take this black stuff. It's the way it's broken off when it's originally been, well, when the original nut came off. It's not come off evenly, so it's left a sort of slope, the incorrect slope. So I've got a bit of extra height in the nut here, so what I'm hoping to do is to end up as close as I can getting just a flat surface, but that's part of the problem with this guitar. I suspect that one of the reasons why it's not been fun to get on with is the original nut hasn't been good. Now I can still feel that the angle is wrong, so I'm going to just try and work it down at the front edge a little bit. It's actually a good file when it comes to push comes to shove. Nearly getting there. I mean, it's kind of difficult because you're pushing it and then moving it across the whole scale or whole area, which is a bit freehand, but it's better than where we were before. That's nearly there, and again I can just get a little bit of the blade action going there, which can be quite handy for the sort of last bits. Now that getting there, I can still see a gap under there, and we're gonna have that gap unless I literally cut all of the black material out, and I'm not 100% sure I want to do that. I mean, obviously I'm reducing it down now a little bit at either end, so we're not yet touching the wood underneath. There's still plastic, or finish I should say, at either ends of this. What I also want to know is this a square? Yeah, the square edge to the fingerboard. That's okay. Sometimes that gets damaged along the way. So as you can see, it's going to end up being a bit of a compromise. It's not going to be perfect. We can have a gap, but it's just so that I can get it to stay in place and it looks pretty good. So we're almost there. A little bit more time and effort to get this flat. Now, see, the slight challenge now is that I'm trying to make the correct angle, and I'm just sort of guessing at how much pressure to put down in the kind of bottom part of the slot, and that's not bad actually, but I am really playing it by ear. So I sort of help it along a little bit with the old blades until I just get close enough, and it will. Yeah, it's very close now. It's the right width, perfect width, which the other one wasn't. It's only about a millimetre short there, but it doesn't look bad at all. It will be fine when the truss rod's on. Okay, that's almost there, and again, being a bit of a perfectionist, I'm going to give it a little bit more go, and then bring it up a little bit but not as much. To get the slope right, if I can guess it. I'd much prefer to be taking down the height off the bottom of the nut. It's much easier or more controlled to do that than it is to be cutting away at the saddle base. I have a feeling that I'm going to kind of stop there, I think, once I've just given this a bit of a little bit of a blade scrape. Yeah, I think I'm very close, he said, going back and tweaking a bit more. I wonder if that's it's a little step there, and I'm going to take it away. That's it. That's where I want to be. Okay, worth the extra effort. I'm going to turn this the other way around because it feels naturaler to go down there. Sorry. I'm just the way I am. Right. So now what I want to do is unhook these strings. And this one. Where have you gone? Come along. So the idea now I've got a flat platform, or the best possible platform in the circumstances. Now my aim will be to tighten these strings up, measure it up, and then get a clear and accurate measurement of how much I'm now going to need to take away. So because I've got a loose nut, I'm going to tidy the D and the G first. Tighten. Okay, so it's not far off. Actually, it's not far off. Could get lucky. Actually, I could be lucky and just have the perfect height from an accidental combination of the nut plus the work I did on the nut slot. So we find out by checking the gap. Now I want 0.3 of a mil. Wow, this is so close. Perhaps a little bit heavier. Right, I'm going to literally, quite literally, do the smallest amount of sanding. A tiny bit on the base end, more than the treble end, but very little, because we're almost there. And what I'll do is I'll use this. These strings to hold the nut down while I finalize it, if you get what I mean. So the first thing I want to do is I want to just flatten off the front edge of the nut, because the mold makes them strangely gloopy. So I want it as smooth and flat and thingy as possible. Now here's the bit. Now I'm going to just clean up the base of this nut, and I'm going to do it with a bit of a bias towards pushing on the base end more than anything. And then I'm going to replace the strings and just double check, and if I'm happy with that, come on strings, it is where I will confirm its location, he said, trying to speak in a trebly cutting voice. Okay, that's loose, so So that's pretty good. There's a tiny variation on these slots, I have to say. So the so in truth, I like to leave the slots untouched. I would say that the low E is a fraction higher than I want, and I could probably just put a tiny bit of a file work in there. Yeah, it's odd. It's a little bit out of thingy, so I'm going to do a tiny adjustment on the 46 department. Those Hosco files, you really have to get used to them. They're not for the faint-hearted beginner. Yeah, they can take too much too quickly. Too little, too much, too soon to ever start again. So I'm cutting down and back a little bit on here before I contact the front edge, and then reduce the action a little bit that way. Okay, better. And the only one that's a bit out is the G, which would be 17. Yeah, I'm going to just do a tiny tweak on that one as well. Very, very careful. Right, that's good. I'm happy with that. So, a small adjustment, which I prefer not to do, but I've learned over the time that tusk nut slots aren't always perfect, despite what you think. So occasionally you do have to do this adjustment. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So what I'm going to do right now is, because I've got these strings here to act as whatever's is the word I'm looking for, to act as clamps, I'm going to put a bit of glue on here, a little bit, not much, and I'm going to do it right on the ends, because obviously I don't have a lot of room in the middle to grip anything. And I'm going to seat this down. Now what I've managed to do is make that a bit difficult for myself. Look at that. What an absolute idiot. So that's a great example of not doing anything with glue when you've got the strings anywhere nearby, because that just makes it a little bit bleeding difficult. Should put that on there for a minute, make it stay in place. We'll take care of worry about the a bit of overspill in a minute. Stay. Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, because you've got the strings that you need to use as a downward force to hold the nut in place. You don't have any real time to get that on, and then that's flipped on me, as you saw. What I will use is, I will actually consider using a little bit of the old, whatchamacallit, super glue remover a bit later on, but let me just get this bit sorted out first. Okay, we're in the right angle, everything's nice and fitted. Okay, nut fitted. Bong. Now that's fine. Now next thing to do, I will find the stuff a bit later on, but for the time being I'm going to take the strings off the de-gluer stuff. I will now get on and do the fret crowning. Yeah, the kind of, I don't know, I probably should have just used my fingers, not the strings, because I usually tend to think that I can't grip it tight enough, and what I don't want is the thing moving once I've fitted it and sinking down somewhat, so I went to use the strings, but as you saw, creates more problems that I've got to put right. Anyway, so what I'll do now is I'll get rid of these sacrificial strings, and I'll get onto the crowning part of the operation, and then prepare it for sanding and polishing the frets out. But I think at the same time I will also take off, sorry the view's disappeared, I will take off the bridge and give it a clean through so everything's nice and lovely. There's an interesting little guide. This is sort of, was it 2.5 millimeter? They use a 2.5 millimeter hex key as a sort of guide to adjust the tremolo screws into the right place. But let's zoom out a minute. Zoom out. Thank you. I'm going to remove the back. Not that back, I don't want the electrics just now. The electrics work okay, as far as I can tell. So I want to take the springs off, undo everything and give it a clean. Where's the one I would normally use? It's gone. I'll use a different one. Some people use a spring to remove the springs and hook them with the spring. So it's interesting. Right, that just about sits flat. So the guide is, this looks actually pretty spot on, but I'll get when it comes to redoing it, putting it back on, once I've cleaned it, I will get my 2.5 millimeter, hex key, and use that to guide this to the right height. So it's a slightly different setup on the PRS screws because they have I don't know if you can see this. Well, you can't yet. The PRS screws. Yeah, you can see it. They've got a little edge in it, which is where the front edge of the plate hooks into to rock backwards and forwards upon. So that's different. And so you have to have the plate sorry, you have to have these set at the right height above the surface of the guitar to ensure that the edges of the holes on the tremolo plate are all touching at the same part, because if you have one of them down, it's not touching, it's touching a different place, it's touching the unthreaded part of the screw shaft and not the pivot cut-in, cinch, whatever you might want to call it. So unlike the with the Strat tremolo screws, the plate rocks on just the clear part of the screw, and that works as the pivot, which I think works perfectly well. I'm not sure. From what I've seen online, people talking about this PRS bridge, some people think that all he's managed to achieve with this is to weaken the screw, which is a possible point of view. So I'm going to just take this apart and give them a clean. That's all really, since I can. While I'm at it, I'm going to remove these old screws. They're actually, some of them are short, which don't really have short equivalents. I have the long versions, but they are quite a bit longer. See, if I don't have replacement shorties, they are reasonable length. They could be changed over, but I don't really want to. Well, I suppose it would do any harm going further in. I might just have to drill a bit further in. That's what I'll do. I'll replace them, but I'll go a little further in so that we don't have any, what's the word? Sheared off bits of screw. It just gives me a chance to use fresh screws. There we are, fresh. These are standard sized pickguard ring screws, so if these rust in future, then at least you just replace them with the standard size ones instead of having to search around for weird unorthodox sized ones. Do these. So I think they get rusty from plenty of good old-fashioned sweat. I gave this guitar a good clean the other day at home, so it's most of it has cleaned up already, but it's the bridge, and it'll get more cleaned, better cleaning when I do the fingerboard after sanding out the frets and polishing them. Rusty old things. Yes. So where are we? I had some, did I have some critical comments referring to my stance on the Russia-Ukraine war? There was somebody, I can't remember, I think it was on YouTube, I think somebody had a go. Which the thing that just struck me, as it always does, is how when you can tell a lot about somebody when at the point at which they disagree with you on something, whether or not they have the capability to explain or share that they disagree with you and have a I don't know what the word would be, a conscious discussion about it, you know, where they can say, I disagree with you, I think it's more like this. But it's really funny that whenever something like that comes up in respect of the Ukraine thing or Russia thing right now, it's always immediately goes straight into kind of insulting mode, which I think is the most telling aspect, really. You know, that you kind of want to say to people, wait a minute, why are you launching into a warlike stance? I mean, can you not just express that you disagree? And could we not talk about it in some way that we learn something a bit about it? I don't know. But it never seems to go like that. It always seems to just go straight into warlike fight mode. I find that really weird. I suppose it just means that the people commenting are, I presume they must be massively invested in the thing, you know, that they literally cannot tolerate somebody having a different view. It's the existence of a different view that seems to drive them nuts, which I think is really weird. I mean, I've never been the kind of person that if you had a different view, I'd feel I either had to be nasty to you straight off, or I had to kill you, fight you and kill you. You know, and that seems to be the way it goes. Very odd. I think that's probably a really interesting, important marker for me, of intelligence. You know, that whether or not you can hear a different point of view and engage with it without being threatened, which these people obviously are. Because if you weren't, you wouldn't respond that way. There's no doubt about it. And it makes you sort of wonder what's so threatening about it. Somebody doesn't share your view. Somebody thinks that Russia is totally in the wrong for doing what it's done, and regardless of any slights or concerns it may have about what NATO has done, will do, might do, none of it in a normal world, world built on law and order and norms, civilized norms, that you being afraid doesn't give you the right to lash out and murder people, citizens, civilians, or invade and take over, try to depose the rulers of a sovereign country. You know, and that's what strikes me really weird about the people who get angry when they disagree with you on this issue, is that they actually genuinely, you can tell they genuinely do feel that because they disagree so strongly, and because Russia disagreed so strongly, apparently, then it's okay to do what they did. And that, to me, is a pretty frightening state of affairs, really, that, you know, these people, basically they're saying, if I disagree with you enough, then I give myself the permission to commit genocide or to murder you or to kill you, to shut you up with your argument. That's actually quite horrifying, really. But it's what Russia's doing. Well, it's not what Russia's doing at all. What Russia's doing, what Putin's doing, is that he's doing what all dictators have always done to store up or shore up his power when he feels it's fading or it's threatened, and that is, you create a war. Now where's the come on, you kidding me? No, that's where it is. I thought I'd lost the spring. Yeah, you create a war, which all failing politicians have done similar, successfully, I might add. So and that's what the most likely and qualified commentators, Russian commentators, but know and believe about the situation. They aren't stupid. They don't get dragged into this. Well, NATO incursions next to the border and threats to Russian power, and you know, that's a story. It's the kind of propaganda that's been swallowed by, I guess, what they would have called the useful idiots of old, people who just go along with anything that the Communist Party of old would say. But it's the people who know best know that it's about shoring up failing power. And that sounds very, very likely and credible to me. Okay, so I'm going to give this a little clean under here, clean on top of there. Yes, so anyway, I'm kind of, at the moment, I'm going between sort of faint optimism that the system that Putin represents or has ruled is before long going to be irrelevant. It's losing its grip. Now, where's my 2.5 mil? Is it 2.5 mil? Let's try a 2.5 mil. Yeah, it's gonna fall apart, and others. That's 1.9 mil. That's not enough. The others in the system will take over, but even then, that certainly doesn't guarantee any leveler heads. That's 3. Guess what? We ain't going to find a 2.5, are we? Thanks for that, Paul Reed Schmidt. Von Schmidt. 2.5. Where would you get a 2.5 from? No way. Come on, man. That could be. Nope, that's a 2. That's a 2. That's a 2. Could this be a 2.5? Yes, finally. Right, where are we? Yeah, so anyway, had this I hope that, I'm kind of hoping that the speed at which the Russian state kind of comes undone is fast enough to change the regime, but not so fast as to be sort of feel like the end of the world. I think we all need it to be if it changes, we need to be at a kind of rational level almost, not in chaos. Because I think that, you know, if the US, or if it escalates and the US or NATO get involved in any direct way, then what happens is things speed up and lead to very bad decisions, dangerous and bad decisions. So I hope that they don't go at that pace, and that if they go slower, then what happens is that discontent grows with Putin's rule, and people start to say, look, you're making a mess of this, your decision to invade Ukraine has cost us a big chunk of our economy. We need to stop before it's too late, and that, well, we still have a chance to regain our economy and stand a chance of a prosperous future. And I think the hope amongst the leveler heads, the hope is that that will prevail, or that thinking will prevail. So we just have to hope that it's paced at such a way that somebody who's prepared to stop doing the Ukraine war is in a position of decision-making power sooner rather than later. Okay, so I'm just putting these down to the recommended 2.5 millimeters above the plate. It's kind of hard to get it precisely exact because the thing moves a bit. The idea of that then is that it gives the plate a fixed height to stand up above the top of the guitar, and that will then obviously also dictate where your action is set on these saddles. And ideally you want it to be such a position that it at the 2.5 mils float that is recommended, you want that to place your saddles in a good sort of halfway position. Okay, there we are, sitting up. Yeah, we want that to allow our target action to be in sort of comfortably within the range of the saddle's adjustment scope, if you get what I mean. If for some reason it wasn't, and if we needed to go lower, then we could, if we hadn't got enough adjustment room left in the saddles, then we might have to make an adjustment on the bridge, so either up or down on the amount of space on the height on these. But as it is, we've gone for the 2.5 mil, which is recommended by those in the know. Okay, so this, I'm going to just undo this a tiny bit so we can get that in, and then we'll do it up more once it's in. Okay, take the waggle out of it. Right, so I'm just going to, at this point in time, I'm going to continue on. I think I might go off the camera while I do the sanding out. So I'll do all of the sanding out business, and I'll go and find where my debonder stuff is and see if I can just ease that off there. Little things like the jack socket needs tightening up. So I've got my, let's do that while I've still thinking about it. So I don't know what you can see. So I've got this nice StewMac thing, which I can drop in here, tighten it to do up, or to hold it in place, and then I can gently do up the jack nut. I prefer to have a spanner for this job really, but I have but an adjustable one. And then we'll do that, that's good. So that's that bit done. I will just try the this thing. Oh yeah, does that do up? No, that's kind of had its day, I think. So we'll take that one out and we'll need to fill. We'll probably use the same screw again, but I think we need to get a fill and re-drill a pilot hole in there. So go for the, find me a bit of 3mm dowel from out here. Just try it out for size. Yep, that will do. Get me some glue. The good thing about this is you don't really, if you don't want to, you don't have to wait a long time for all this to dry. You can put in the fit in the dowel and screw straight into it pretty quickly if you wish. So I'm just going to load the hole with glue. Very common that these wear out after a period of time. So get my little hammer and tap this in. Okay. Come on, thank you. Snip. Wow, it's almost like it wants to go all the way in. How big a hole is that? That was odd. Swamp ash. I mean, it's not pastry soft, is it? It's not hardest wood, but right. So while I'm here, I'm just going to clean up the end of that, and with my new blade I'm going to very carefully trim this piece of dowel. Then we will put a small, very small hole, pilot hole. That's a big screw, if you'll excuse the expression. So I probably need to go a bit, find a bigger one than that. But, and to help it along, I will, sorry, I've got my scriber. Blimey. Magnets sometimes make things hard. My scriber, and I'm going to put a start hole in there with the scribe, and then I'm going to hold this so, and go in that far, and then line up your bits and bobs. Now what I really want for this bit is I want a battery powered thing, which is over here. Okay, I don't know if the camera's still running or if everything's still got batteries or what, but there we go. Now I'm going to just hold on to this and nice and solid. That one's okay. So that's cleared up or solved that. We've got the jack plug done up. We've got that done. Now the next bit will be the off-camera bit of masking all this off and crowning. Well, I suppose I could crown the frets now while we're on camera. Yeah, and after that, mask off the neck with tape. And then tomorrow, I think, I'll come back and fit the new strings and we'll wrap up tomorrow, and that will be, I may be wearing a painting mask while I do that, because I think I will come and do some painting, and then I'll finish this in the in-betweens while I'm doing coats. But because I'm working in the small space, I will I will end up being masked. Okay, so fret crowning. We were going on, I think we were medium. So I like to just about give the diamond coated surface of this file a little bit of a clean between frets, just to get rid of the pen. The pen has a sort of slightly sticky effect and can gum things up fairly quickly, so I always clean as I'm going along. Yeah, it always strikes me funny that, you know, when people when us who are witnesses to this terrible suffering and I mean the suffering, by the way, of the Ukrainian people, but also the suffering of those poor hapless Russian kids who are being thrown into this thing in a war that they don't believe in really and are totally ill-equipped for. And I feel sorry for everybody involved in that. But it seems even more difficult when, you know, to have a view about it. It seems like just to be nothing more than a trigger for other people to take a side in order to jump on and start lashing out. You know, it's kind of, well, it's obviously part of what the problem is in the first place. You know, I suppose the desire to settle disputes by violence and force. But, you know, I've read a lot of Russian history, and I know that has been the Russian way, I'm afraid, for far too long. You know, and even some people who will be pro-Russian will balk at that and react to that, accusing, you know, say, and what I hear them on the radio all the time, and they'll say, yeah, but what about the illegal war in Iraq? You know, Britain's exactly just as bad. And actually, it isn't. It's made mistakes and done things wrong, for certain, but it hasn't. We have not, and this is what really galls me, because it just goes to show a person who says something like that hasn't read a single piece of history. And I know that a guy I follow, a Ukrainian military guy who works in comms, you might call it propaganda, but he's on the Ukrainian side of messaging. He responded to an American commentator on a Joe Rogan. I didn't know the guy at all, but this Ukrainian guy who's known as, he calls himself Starsky. He played clips of this sort of, I don't know what age he was, this guy, 30s or whatever, mid-30s, commenting like he knew the history of Russia and Ukraine, and it was just absolute garbage, what he was spouting. He had no understanding of actual history. You know, he'd clearly not read a book in which actual history is documented. You know, to the point, I mean, on this day, this was signed and this happened and this was undone and this was put in place. You know, that kind of history, the kind that we will all, most people agree is factual history without the interpretation or, you know, whys and wherefores. And Starsky was he was kind of pulling he didn't have any, but he was pulling his hair out at the ignorance of this guy. But it's not just so much the ignorance, is it the Dunning-Kruger thing, isn't it, where the stupider you are, the less aware of your lack of knowledge you are. So you overestimate your abilities. And this guy, had no concept whatsoever that he didn't know what he was talking about. He just assumed that he was informed and correct about things, and it was a terrible demonstration of ignorance. But anyway, so Starsky sort of went through his whole outburst, correcting him and putting him right. But of course, that guy will never hear that. He's never going to sit still long enough to allow someone to fact check him. But it was the throwaway certainty, and it's what we do in the media. It's just pass ill-informed opinion off as fact. And there is a group of people who will not accept that and say, no way, I don't take your ranting for chapter and verse. And then there's a group of people who will just accept it and then re-quote it, saying, in 2014 Ukraine bombed this and did that and killed these people. And that, in a way, that's what I would call, and I know for a fact that's what the Kremlin would call its useful idiots. The sort of people in the West who think they are a step ahead of the sheeple, that kind of thing where people insist on following conspiracy theories because it makes them feel one step ahead and therefore better than normal, different and better than the average Joe, because I know what you don't know. I know that there really are reptilians, running the world or whatever it is. And unfortunately they do the same with seem to do the same with this kind of Russian-Ukraine history business. Just spout a kind of, I don't know, this sort of edgy so-called truth. And I've been amazed at watching how Russian propaganda has gone. I don't really think it was always like this, but in fact I know it wasn't always like this. Russian propaganda used to be, sort of fairly understandable in that you'd have the the kind of propaganda poster, a bit like North Korea still is, and China. You'd have the propaganda poster showing what an idyllic place the Soviet Union was, and how everybody was united in brotherhood and blah blah, and the great plans of the leaders had come to fruition, and everyone had all they needed and lived in this paradise and so on. And in the old days, that's what propaganda was. It was one side putting across a version of themselves that they wanted everyone to believe, or a version of events. But it's changed, and it's become that the Russians don't do that anymore. What they do is that they just concentrate on undoing what people thought they knew. So the Russian propaganda doesn't tell you a story about how wonderful it is to be in Russia anymore. That's kind of, that would be the old model of propaganda. What it does now is it focuses entirely on sowing doubt in people's minds about what they thought was true or what they thought was solidly understood. And so that's why they've done all that amazing stuff around Brexit, and the US election. They can get behind things and widen divides and destabilize things that we would have referred to as the truth, or something solid and certain that we could depend on. And I think that's an amazingly powerful shift that Putin's done. And somebody commentated it when a Ukrainian spokesperson was referring it to today, that most people in the UK, I don't think, understand how much money the Kremlin spends on paying trolls in buildings around the world, Africa for starters, to sit there and to engage in arguments and unsettle, certainties, undoing certainties, so they get in behind discussions and sow doubt in certain people's minds that what they thought was dependable and true isn't. And this is full time. And you don't have to be that clever to see them. You can be on any Facebook page where they're discussing Ukraine, and before you know it, there'll be a load of Africans come along, and it's not being, what's the word, presumptuous or racist. A load of people with African names will turn up and suddenly be very, very engaged in talking about why Putin's a genius and why the West deserves this and has it coming to it and so forth, and that they've got a plan that you're going to be sorry, you Westerners, after having pillaged Africa and the third world and whatever. But these are paid. These are paid people. I think British people, find it hard to believe that would be true, that somebody would actually go to that length to do something as fundamentally dishonest as that, to have people trying to skew opinion by being paid to appear to have a view. And it's so not British fair play, is it? But that's the way it works, and the sums of money that the Kremlin spends or has spent and spends on this is by all accounts astronomical. And to the point, I heard a Ukrainian guy today saying, the West needs, Ukraine and the West needs to put as much or something like as much money into doing the same to counter the Russian stuff, because we don't think it's a decent thing to do. But he was saying that we're missing the trick, we're not countering it, and it's to our detriment. Anyway, but yeah, it's people sort of think, when you say, look at the African names suddenly appearing supporting Russia all of a sudden in this discussion, and people think you're making it up, and they insist that they're just ordinary people who've got a view. Of course, they've got as much right to come in and share their view as anyone, of course. But you don't see them getting involved in pretty much any other debate that's convenient and coincidental. Still, there we go. Right, I'm going to do this bit off camera because it's boring. I shall see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Catch up with you later. Right, so here we are again. Oh no, I better have a close-up. Start again. Right, here we are again. It's the morning. Ta-da! And actually, inside in here, I'm preparing my little spray space, because I've got a monster to be spraying. So I'm kind of dehumidifying and heating at the same time, with my kind of curtains to block off. So once I've finished this PRS, I'm going to put it in its case and get on with that out there. So everything's done, frets are polished, fingerboard is oiled. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom to about there. I'm going to put on fit is the word I want. Looking to find the word fit. I'm going to fit new strings, excuse me, 10s, and I'm going to thingy them up, attach them, and stretch them. So these are Diderios, so they come in consecutive pairs. Do they come in? I don't know how these work. Yeah, they're one. Yeah, E and A, and so on, I think. It's the, what's the ones that go in alternate, 1 and 3? That's, is there any balls? Probably. There's no rotor sound, certainly do that, I think. Okay. So, yes, it's always quite fun when I get into the spraying in here. This is the sort of winter plan for spraying, because in the summer, when the basic humidity is low enough, low enough, I can go into the big spare room, inverted commas, and spray in there, and sort of, but even that, it's not ideal. Mainly because to really do spraying well, you've got to have an environment where you can control the dust and particles in the air. And I'm afraid in this sort of environment, it's not only as it's a fully working recycling plant, but it's just the amount of dust and stuff in the air generally from the overall state of the buildings is there's just a lot of it about, let's put it that way. So I never get a perfect job as far as I'm concerned. So sometimes it ends up being better to rope off this small space that I can go a lot further towards kind of keeping the dust down. I can also heat it better and dehumidify it better, this overall small space. Because it's made of this refrigerator truck panels, it does a good job in keeping the heat for a long time, and it's because it's quite airtight in that respect. It's also pretty good at keeping humidity down once it's got down, so it is the better of the spaces in many ways to do spraying. But the downside is, of course, is that once I start spraying I have to wear a mask in here, which means if I carry on doing other jobs I have to be doing stuff off camera really, and then or I have to, failing that, I have to kind of vent the room and wait till it clears and come back and do some more. So it's kind of much better when I can do it out in that other room, come back in here, close the door, and take a mask off and carry on doing other work. But it really is reserved for the summertime, because in Britain it's not really usually that cooperative in terms of humidity. We're a damp country, it's as simple as that. Although we had a good, relatively good summer with some very high temperatures and a lot of low humidity this year. So my original thought was to take that spare room and turn it into a spray type of environment, but I have to say right now the cost of doing that to make it a secure, or not secure, but a sealed, controllable environment would be, could easily spend 5 to 10 grand doing it, and I don't have that much spray work to justify it, and nor I don't think would I particularly get that much spray work. So it's come back down to needs must type of approach. But anyhow, so I'm now putting on the last 2 strings, the E's, and what I'll do after this is I'll stretch the strings out, and then once they're stretched out excuse me, I'll intonate, and I will then be ready to go. And by that time I think my environment in there will be nice and relatively dry and warm. I've got the the tins of spray sitting in the warm air as well, so with luck all of that will be at the right sort of temperature. I do have a, what do they call it, a high volume low pressure spray system, but it's quite a messy business, and I think for nitro I don't really think it's worth bringing that out unless I've got quite a lot of spray jobs to do, which right this second I don't have, so I kind of just kept it to cans for this particular one. So I'm just going to sort of pull these strings a little bit and get them bedded on. There's a little bit of, tiny bit of leftover glue there, still got to wipe clean. The, what you call it, the debonder's good stuff, but it's just left a tiny little bit. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is tune it up with my tuning fork. Now this is going to gradually pull up the plate. So to get it probably to where I want it, in this case, because it's a floating tremolo, I'm probably just better off starting with one reference note to know I'm in the right octave. Believe it or not, I always like to do that because you can sometimes, if you're a little inexperienced particularly, you can get caught out starting off on the wrong octave altogether, and that can be quite costly. Now what's happening when you tune up, what you'll find is you have to find equilibrium. So when you tune one up, because it's going to be floating, you'll find the others move as well. This is actually quite stiff. Let's just check. It should be, according to this, it should be on its, all of them should be on their little thingies. Now the amount of tension you want on is something that you can adjust with the springs. I'm not going to play with that. I'm going to leave it where it was. Now, at the moment it hasn't got any back pull because we're still kind of supposedly stretching it out. So what you'd expect with a floating trem, any kind of floating trem, is it to go out of tune several times in a row. So by the time you've tuned it and come back round, kind of expected the first one to be out of tune again. And that's what you have to keep on doing, and by the time it's sorted itself out, you should find your bridge floating in the position it was in before. Let's have a quick look down here, making sure these are all at the right height. They are at the right height, and that's sitting where it should do. I'll still keep on adjusting. So I had 10s on before, I'm pretty certain of it, and I've gone back to 10s, and they are just about level, which is where it was in the first place. What I'll take care of now is I'll just double check the neck relief, because we put heavier strings on, and the neck relief is okay, it's very slight, don't want to do any more with that. I'm looking at the height of the strings now over the first fret, and I think they still need a little bit of tweaking, which is fine. I'll take take care of that. We'll also now look at the last fret action. I've still got stretching to do, but I'm just going to try and make sure that this is getting to the right place. So we have just on 1.5 there, and we have just over 1 there. So okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm kind of happy that's doing what it should. I'm now going to stretch, thumb and forefinger, stretch the strings, get rid of as much slack as possible, because the key to tuning stability, as I've said in every video I've ever made in last 10 years, no, last 8 years probably, in my experience the key to tuning stability can pretty much be described as in 2 parts. Half of it is down to the condition of your nut slots and the material that your nut is made of, and how well your nut allows the strings to pass through without friction. The other half is this, stretching the slack out of your strings. And it's interesting that your tuners don't feature in that equation at all. So that means they don't play a role in keeping the guitar in tune. They obviously play a role in getting the guitar up to pitch, and you know, how expensive they are is down to, you know, what quality materials they're made from. You know, if you pay more, you get better looking, more stylish, better constructed tuners, which feel smoother to operate and can be higher geared and therefore adjust much more progressively and gradually. But once they've done what they're supposed to do, which is pull the string up to a certain pitch, they don't have any role in whether that string stays in that pitch or not. That comes down to the 2 things I said, which is the nut and the slack in the strings, or I should say the unreleased slack. Now the thing about stretching the strings is, realistically, people might say, how long do I need to stretch these strings for? And the answer would be for as long or until they stop going out of tune when you stretch them. And that sort of, well, okay, so how long is that? Well, it differs every time. It can be slightly impacted by how much string you've got wound around the posts on the tuners, but that's actually, as long as you do it with no more than 2 wraps, it's not really a big issue. It's mostly in the general stretching like this. So you notice now this is the 3rd time I've done this thumb and forefinger stretching, and it's still going a little bit out of tune. Now of course this is a floating tremolo, which is a little bit harder to stabilize, or you know, it's a little harder to tell when you've successfully stretched all the slack out your strings, because the kind of floatiness of the tremolo can adjust as well. But we're close to it now. There you go, that's in tune. So that's the standard. If that's the 2.5mm setting, which I copied from all the people in the know, that's the standard range of upbend that people want. Right, little pulls, and I think we'll be close to it then. And after that, I'm going to check the intonation. And So I'll do the last sort of tuning for a minute at this held position. It's very close. Okay, yeah, I'm going to investigate the first fret actions now with the new strings on it, and I'll just check how close we are or how far off we are. It's not a mile off, but a mile off. This will mess up the tuning a little bit, but we'll come back to that and redo it. Right, so we're going to go with, what's the first one? 17. That was a little high before anyway. Now, I don't know, should we get a close up? These Hosco nut files are quite interestingly, they're not very forgiving if you're not used to them. And I'm not massively used to them, but I've sort of figured out a bit about what I need to know about them. So already the string has put a shiny bit on the front edge, which is fine, which is where we want the string to kind of rub against the edge of the nut, and that helps me to see when I've touched the, I'm trying to lower the slot in a backward slant, but without doing too much, taking too much off the front edge until I want to, like so. Get a bit of a downward cut into it, and I'm trying to do it very, very restrainedly. Now, another way I would have done it in the past is to use these. These are actually easier to control, believe it or not, than these correct Hosco files, but it tends to make a what's the word? It makes a wider notch, which sort of makes you really need to remove some height off the nut once you've finished, and that sort of changes it. But it's actually a very good way to do it. It's very controllable. This can be it can catch you unawares and cost you in ways you weren't expecting. So I'm just taking my time really carefully, because they are a good file to use. They just are, as I say, they can be quite ravenous and catch you unawares. That's pretty close. I'm going to do a tiny, tiny whiff more. There we go. That looks good. Just on the balance of, on the edge of that 0.3. So it's about getting it right and being very cautious. Next one we want is the 13, which is the downside here. I should draw it on the blade really, but hey. So we're going to do the 13, which is not far off, but just do that little extra. And again, I can also see the tiny bit of shine on the front edge of the nut slot. So it tells me when I've cut downwards. At the moment I'm cutting the slope more than anything, and then that cut down into the slot a little bit. So it gives me a very, hopefully a very slow, progressive cut down. Now in a way these slots are already just a fraction higher than, sorry, not higher, a fraction deeper than I would want. But actually, the good thing about these Hosco files is that because they're slightly I don't know what the word would be, notch-tastic. When you cut with them, they clear a path above them, so you don't have you can have a deeper nut slot without any risk that it's binding the string, which I think is it's the reason why I switched to those Chinese jeweler files in the first place, because it occurred to me that the notch is a V-notch is a much better shape than a straight-walled notch, which was the thing that the Hiroshima files used to give you. They were just very straight, thin pieces of metal, and so they made a slot that went downwards and had straight walls. Now that results in more grip than you want. So having kind of gone to the cheap, inverted commas, Chinese jeweler file, it became clear to me that that was a better profile of notch, and so I kind of went with that. And then the Hosco files came on my horizon, and I tried them out, and it occurred to me that they were perfect because they created that notch shape as well, but being a little less severe than less V-shaped, I could call it, than the jeweler file. But the jeweler file is actually a brilliant, cheap way of doing your nut slots, and the worst you have to do is to afterwards clean, sand down the excess material above the string, which I could do here, but it would just change the look of the nut a bit. But there's no harm in it. I'm comfortable with this because I know that there's no gripping going on in here because of the shape of the slot. So right, so those are done. That one, let's just check that one again. That's a fraction over, but let's do a tiny bit more just for the sake of it. That's very good. Happy there. Now we're going to drop these off for a minute and go. Starting to get nice and warm in here. Humidity is saying out here at 64%, but I don't think it's actually there's that much in there. Okay, so now we're going to go 26, 36, 46. So these are pretty close actually. But I'll just do a very tiny bit. And again, I can see where the thing is touching on the nut material. So I think the judgment with any kind of file, but with this kind of file is, whoops, get the right way around, I'm doing the 26. The judgment, is something that comes with experience or it doesn't. And if you get it wrong, it costs you in having to start out with a new nut. And I've been in that situation many a time. It's a pain in the butt. But it's, you hopefully you eventually get the experience to do it. And when you do, it's very satisfying because you can get a really nice low action and everything beautifully in tune. Okay, so we're working now with wrong colour. We're working with much wider slots. So they kind of, on one hand, they take longer to cut, but on another hand, they can sometimes seem to lurch forward quicker. So we have to be very careful. You can be kind of pressing for a while and nothing happens, and then suddenly you're over the mark. So it's just getting that sort of pattern of how this works. We're on the mark. I'll obviously retune again in a minute, just when I've got these. The 46 down here. So the idea, of course, is we want to cut a backwards tilting slot, so that the string comes up the front and exits cleanly off the front part of the nut. So it's a matter of cutting backwards for quite a bit and then pressing a little bit down on the front when you want to lower the front, because it's the front edge that makes all the difference to the height, really. Let's have a quick look. That's okay, that's okay. I should just think that let me just go back a second. I think that D may be a fraction too tall for my likings. Go back to the D, which is the 26. Get a tiny bit more here. 26. I always break my nails off doing this. Okay, that's good, that's good, that's good, that's good. Right, now back to the A. A is good. And E is good. That's actually technically a fair bit over, so I will take a tiny bit more off. We're on the 46. So yeah, you can see it is clearly trial and error. I think that's good. I'll go with that. Now I'm going to just tune it up in a row. Okay, last little bit of tweaking to get the equilibrium. Nearly there. Oh, you can't see. I'm so sorry. Terrible camera work. So whenever you slack off the strings, you have to treat it as if you've put new strings on. And gently stretch it all back into. Right, well, let's just do a quick check on the intonation. Well, I copied what was there before, so that's pretty good. Yep. I'll do a little bit more stretching because of the fact that I've taken it off and on a couple of times, but I think that's just about it. Okay. Everything done. That little tiny bit of glue down there will come off just on the join there. Actually, I need to see if it is glue. It might be just the very edge of the nut. Anyway, so we've got new strings, frets leveled, bends recovered, bridge set at its standard listed height, new tusk nut, slots cut, final little adjustments at the end, tremolo floating horizontal to the body, four springs on as it was before. Sorry, bit of sawdust in there, and then we're ready to go. So fingers crossed, Ryan. Hope you enjoy this better than it was. The action here is beautiful. It's really, really low, and I mean it feels incredibly light. Well, it's tens. I'm hopeless at bending tens. So a little bit more bending to do. Never hurts to keep on bending until it's stable. Conclusion for me, do I adore this guitar? Yeah, I could grow to like it. I think I'd have to live with it for a while. But I love the look of it. I haven't played it enough to really get to know the sound of it so much, but it sounded fantastic when I played it the other day, so I can't fault that. Question is whether or not the bridge with its little cinched posts is as good as it's meant to be. Is hard to know at the moment. So if we're saying that's the way it plays right now, hit the thing, G's gone sharp, D's gone sharp, A sharp and E sharp. So that means it's not returned completely to pitch, and that's at the factory setting, if you like. So really, how and why, I don't quite know. That should be running at perfection there. They're all at all at 2.5 mils of height. So, I mean, all I can do in this case, if I want to, is just to take the pressure off it again and readjust it, which I might do, just to double check, since that's the important part of this. But you know, it may just be that it's not the best tremolo design in the world. I don't know, because I've never owned this tremolo, so it's a bit outside of my realm of experience. So what I'll do is I will undo this a minute, and I will just tweak. Thank you. Take that out, undo that. We'll take the springs off and let it just relax, and I'll do it one more time just to double check the 2.5mm thing. But it's in the right place, but I'm presuming, there we go, I'm presuming that it's all of them are set to exactly the right place. So these are all slack, so nothing bad will happen here. That will flop forward, as you would imagine, and this will then drop down onto the deck. We could do with these being a bit more off. So just a little final look at this to see whether those heights are all absolutely correct. So there's our back, that's with it sort of sitting back. Actually I'll probably, yes, I'll put one spring on to keep that in place. That's the way to do it in this case. Bear with me. Probably just worth doing this off camera instead of wasting your time. But there's one. That's slightly too much. That's pulling it up, riding it up the thing. So I don't really want to do that. I just wanted to hold it in place, basically. Sit it down flat. There it is, flat. So what we have to have is the 2.5 mils under each one of these. And as far as I could see, that was on the mark. I mean, what I did is I did it down until the string began to move. Sorry, not the string, the plate began to move. So that to me feels like dead on. I can go under the side there. Maybe there's a tiny bit of room in there. So a little bit difficult without this being held down, which I guess can do without any pressure on from the strings. You don't need no pressure on. You don't need no pressure on. This will mean I've got to stretch everything again just to be sure at the end, but I would rather double check this because I want to be able to conclude whether this tremolo works or not. So I don't want to give it any reason why not to. So what I'm just going to do to make life a bit better is just to tie this down a minute, make sure it sits on the deck, just while I make final adjustments. Stay there. So that 2.5 mils is what we're looking for, and there's my thing. Now what I did before is I moved it until such times as it clamped down on it, so you could say that was the point there. It's a tiny bit different. And let's go to here, vertical, touching, very very close, but maybe a tiny bit of adjustment room in there. That's there. I have to release it just enough to get the hex key out. Okay, you could say that's locking down on there, that's out. Touching, released. Sorry, not a very good view or commentary or anything, but it's fiddly, I promise. Right, biting, released. Okay, well that's as accurate as I'm going to get. Right, let's put these on here. Put it down. Thank you. 1, 2, missed. Very vintage and old-fashioned, this system. Primitive, in fact. Okay, now a gentle do up again, followed by, I won't, will I do it? Yeah, I suppose I'll stay on while I check and see if that's improved anything on the, as far as the tremolo function is concerned, worth knowing. So I'm just holding these strings tight as I feed them back on, just to make sure that they go on coiled correctly. I think think I'm going to need to get spraying shortly. It's not a bad thing to have a long time to warm up everything. Probably more thorough than I would have gone left to my own devices. Okay. Gentle pull. So that's put everything back to as close to the 2.5 as I can get. It was pretty close before, but let's see if that extra tiny bit of tweak has an effect. And people often get really confused by tremolos, and actually they're very mechanical. They're simple mechanical things, really. You know, either this, let's take that off for a minute, either this thing will rock forward smoothly and return to equilibrium, or it won't. The thing about the getting all the screws exactly level is quite critical. It's far more sensitive actually to it than a standard 6-screw Strat tremolo. And the reason for that is because they've given you a far narrower range of things to hit. So you've got to be exactly in the right spot to line up. It's typically what happens is when you have to have 6 things lined up exactly, and if one of them gets out of sequence, then the whole thing starts to not work. And with 6 little cinched hourglass sort of edges, it's very different when you've got 6 bare chromed screws for the knife edges to rest on. They don't have to be in exactly the same place. They can be fractionally out. They're still touching a clean piece of chrome or whatever, steel, to operate. Introducing the 6 slots, if you like, introduces a level of accuracy into this which suddenly becomes critical. Because if, like I say, if one's a fraction off, the thing stiffens up. If 2 are even a tiny fraction off, the whole thing stiffens up. If 3 are almost imperceptibly off, the whole thing stiffens up. See, it's still going. Still going sharp slightly, and it's not returning quite as well as I would like. But I have to say, beyond that, getting those things in the line, there's nothing much we can do beyond that if it's not going to do it. I wouldn't use. I'm not sure I like the idea of this. When I was talking about it earlier on in the video, and I talked about, it occurred to me that it didn't have any natural advantages, and in fact the only thing it seemed to offer was a disadvantage of thinning or weakening the screw. Seems to like downward. Okay. Yeah, it's just a little bit reluctant on the pullback, but unfortunately there is nothing extra I can do about that. It's just going to be the way it is. Yeah, it's the nature of that tremolo, and like I say, that's about as spot on as you're going to get it using the methods described in the PRS thing. It's not bad, and it certainly works down pretty well. And if you go up, a touch down cures it. It's very small, but it's just enough to be what I would consider very slightly annoying, but that's just my preference. Okay, that's it. I'm going to go and do some spraying. Thank you for watching. Let's see what Ryan makes of this when it comes back to him. Later.